It's entirely possible that Scotland will acquire independence at some point in the future. But is this a good idea? Maybe. Maybe not. So to answer this question, I'm going to present you with two economic arguments, one against and one in favour of independence, and then I'll provide my own thoughts on the issue. So let's begin. An argument against independence is that Scotland is economically reliant on the United Kingdom and would therefore be worse off if it were to leave. An argument in favour of independence is that Scotland is held back and restricted by the UK central government and therefore must break free in order to realise its full potential. I'll address the argument against independence first. Scotland's economic reliance on the United Kingdom is shown by its large budget deficit. This stood at over 7% of GDP before the current recession, which is really high. Proportionally speaking, this was 23 times higher than England's deficit, which in the same year stood at 0.3% of GDP. And to add to this, as a result of the current economic crisis, everyone's deficit has increased significantly. Scotland's has now more than doubled. So at first glance, it would appear that Scotland's finances are in dire straits. However, the shortfall is covered by financial support provided by the UK central government in Westminster. And therefore, the economic argument against independence is that Scotland would lose this financial support and would therefore be presented with three stark choices: to reduce their public budget, to raise taxation, and to borrow lots of money. The argument is that any one of these policies would cause considerable harm to the Scottish economy. Moving on to the argument in favour of independence, it's said by some that despite the support provided by Westminster, there is reason to believe that Scotland's relationship with the UK is inherently restrictive. This is shown by the fact that the Scottish Government is restricted in its ability to borrow money for the purpose of public investment, with the maximum amount allowed being £450 million a year. This is a relatively small number when compared with the size of Scotland's economy, which has a GDP of £167 billion. So therefore, those in favour of independence argue that the abolition of such borrowing restrictions would allow for more public investment and consequently more economic growth. As a result, revenue from taxation would increase over time, and the deficit would therefore decrease to a more sustainable level. According to this argument, the only way to achieve the abolition of the borrowing restrictions is for Scotland to acquire independence. So what are my thoughts on these views? I'll start by saying that the argument in favour of independence has some merit to it. If Scotland borrowed and invested more money, its economy would grow, and as a result, revenue from taxation would increase, and this would help them reduce their budget deficit. However, I think it would also be reasonable to question whether such deficit spending would be irresponsible, because if it failed to work, it could lead to a public debt crisis at some point in the future. And I assume that this would occur if the debt to GDP ratio continued to grow despite any economic growth obtained by deficit spending. And then there's the question as to what currency they would use. I assume that a policy of deficit spending would require monetary independence, and so the use of a currency which they don't have control over, such as the British pound sterling or the euro, might not provide them with the ability to borrow as much as they would like to. And so an independent Scotland would probably need its own currency. And this brings me to the end of the video. For those of you who are interested, I'll put the links to the sources in the description below. I'd also be happy to hear what you think about this subject in the comments section. Which side of the debate do you agree with, and what do you think about my views? If you could help me out by liking this video and subscribing to the channel, I would appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.